All right, good morning, everybody. Thanks for hopping on. We got a great large group for this wonderful presentation from Ted Nellesen at the Iowa Department of Management on a timely topic, as always, with the AFR, but there have been some changes that Ted will walk you through. And so with that, I'm going to quickly move things over to Ted. Real quickly, though, and I'll ask Ted this too while we're at it, how do we want to answer questions? I know the chat function is alive and going. I can see a lot of comments already going there on the good mornings. Thank you all. Ted, if that works for you, we can just use that and we can monitor together.
Yeah, and Mickey, if you just want to stop me if you see some pertinent questions, that's fine.
Yeah,
Um, and that way we can kind of keep moving unless you see something that you think would be super useful. Otherwise, we'll answer a bunch of them at the end.
yeah, that's perfect. Sounds good. All right, let's get you started, Ted. Thank you.
Okay, as Mickey mentioned, I'm Ted Nellis with the Iowa Department of Management. We are going to talk about a new page that is required on the city annual financial report this year. The House File 718 passed 2 years ago, had a delayed implementation of a couple of parts of the bill, and one of the parts of the bill was a debt reporting requirement for cities and counties that is phasing in, starting with the fiscal year 24-25 annual financial reports for both cities and counties. So the reason that there is a new debt reporting requirement phasing in on the annual financial report is right here. There's a county and city bond issuance report that the Department of Management now has to give to the Iowa General Assembly every year by January 1. And the report basically is a reporting of what types of debts exist out in cities and counties, and how were those debts approved and what were the amounts. So we have to have reported to us information we've never had before and never asked for before. So that kind of necessitated us going back to the AFR drawing board and building out more granular data recovery from that report. So the items we're going to be asking about are going to be focused in addition to the normal stuff that we asked about, which was, amounts outstanding, amounts paid during the fiscal year. We're also going to have some information needed about what type of debt is it? Is it GO essential corporate purpose? Is it GO general corporate purpose? How was it approved? Voted, not voted because it's essential corporate purpose, not voted because it's below threshold, or not vote or voted because it was above threshold. And then we're going to need the amounts outstanding and the amounts of issuance, which we've never asked for amounts of issuance before on the AFR. So that'll be a bit new, but it won't be any different from the budget where we do ask for amount of issuance as part of the long-term debt page. In addition to that report, there are specific requirements laid out under 384.22 sub 1 of the Iowa Code now about the type of information that we have to collect in addition to the reported information for that debt issuance report. It's going to ask for a listing of all outstanding bonds, notes, and other obligations. And the other obligations is the part that I'll point out there, because that's actually going to necessitate some TIF reporting on the AFR that we haven't really required in the past. We're going to try to make it as easy as possible and keep it all to one line, because I know if we reported a lot of the TIF agreements that exist out there, we could go for pages and pages and pages. So we'll go over that in a little bit, but just keep that in the forefront of your mind. Now we're not just reporting structured outside debts, we're also going to be reporting TIF agreement debts as well. The amount of issue has to be collected. So the amount that was originally, the original amount of issue when the debt was originally approved. The purpose of the issuance is going to be brand new. So you have to state, and you're going to have to state it very concisely because of the limitation of space that we have on the pages. What was this debt issued for? What was it used to pay for? The method of approval will also, like I said on the other slide, will also be, we'll have a couple of spots where you'll have to talk about the method of approval. And then, is this debt tied to any of the city's other debts? So that's going to be kind of a new concept for everybody. The city debt detail page is the new, and it's really a new set of pages, just like the long-term debt page on the budget. The city debt detail is 6 pages that we've added at the end to allow for enough space to have everybody. It should be 120 lines of debt that can be added to just for everybody to have enough space to enter all of their outstanding debts. So Like I said, similar to long-term debt page in look and function, a couple of extra pieces of information there that we're going to require. In addition to what is required by the bill, we're also going to require a rate range at the request of the Auditor of State's office. So there you're going to have to put in what's the low interest rate that I'm getting on this debt and what's the highest interest rate that I'm getting on this debt across the course of the debt. We'll cover that when we demonstrate in a minute. Remember, we're talking about principal outstanding as of the beginning of the fiscal year, just like we always have on the AFR. So make sure that when we get to the amount of principal outstanding column, you're thinking in terms of July 1, in this case, July 1 of 2024, how much debt was outstanding, or if I added the debt during the year, how much principal did I add in during the year? That would go under the principal outstanding. The method of approval, we call it the voted column. It's going to be a whole new thing, so we'll go over that here in a second. And then tied to other debts is going to be a drop down where you select if this debt is associated with another debt or they paid for the same project together. You have to link them together, and I'll show you that here in a second. All right, and then again, we're going to be asking for the purpose of the debt. And you'll just have you'll have 150 characters in that cell to explain what was this debt used for in broad terms. Okay, so let's take a look at the new debt page itself. So annual financial reports, you go there like always. You go to the 2025 report once I release it here. We've been having some changes that needed to be made, so I haven't released the report into the production environment yet, but I'm going to go into a demonstration one here, drops me into the All Funds P1. All of the pages that you normally would see are still there up through other P10, and then after other P10, we added in this city debt detail page. Now, other P10 didn't change at all. That's where you normally reported your debts. On this page, you would come in and you'd fill out this long-term debt matrix by hand. The difference here is this will now fill out from the city debt detail page. So as you enter your granular debt information, one debt at a time, it will aggregate into this page so that you won't have to redo your work. Okay. The only debt piece that you'll still have to deal with here is the short-term debts, because on the debt detail page, we're only looking at our long-term debts. The short-term debts, such as your planning and design loans or construction loans that will be subsumed by a larger debt issuance in the future, those are still reported down here under the short-term debt section. But the long-term debt section will fill in from this new city debt detail page. So the city debt detail page, like I said, looks very similar to the long-term debt page on the budget. Okay. First column, excuse me, is the debt series name. So just give it a simple name. For the most part, you're going to want to have this be very similar to the name that you give it on the long-term debt page of the budget. So you can keep these pretty similar with a year of the debt issuance. What type of repayment are you going to be looking at? GO, revenue, road use tax, revenue, TIF, and then what was it used for? So in this case, TIF rebates, it was our use, or TIF agreements. You could also call this TIF agreements if you're including more than just rebates. A lot of cities only have rebates, but some of you have like economic development agreements or forgivable loan agreements. So you could put all of your agreements on one line. We want you to aggregate it all together. Okay, so first line, I call it TIF rebates. The next thing I have to deal with is what type of debt is it? And this becomes very important because the type of debt that you select tells other P10 which of the columns this flows into along the top. Is it going to be a GO? Is it going to be revenue? Is it going to be other? Is it going to be TIF revenue? So it tells us where on the other P10 form to put it. So in this case, for TIF rebates, I would select TIF agreement, which means leave it out of the other P10 categorization altogether, because the other P10 is primarily for the Census Bureau. They don't care about that so much. So we're going to have you put all of your TIF rebates and agreements under the TIF agreement debt type, and then that will exclude it from the other P10. Be aware of that. So when these numbers will not flow through to the other P10, they're just collected for the purposes of that report to the General Assembly. Date of issuance, we want you to put the date that it was actually issued long ago. You can see on line 2 here, I have a 2014 GO. So it was issued in September of 2014. So that's the date that I put for date of issuance. For TIF rebates, since you're going to have a wild array of when those are issued, we're going to say the date of issuance is always the end of the fiscal year being reported. So it'll be 6/30 and then the year that we're reporting for fiscal year. So in this case, 6/30/2025 is what we enter there. Okay. Debt resolution for again, for the TIF rebates, you just put in TIF rebate. For everything else, you put in the original resolution that approved the debt. So your council has to pass a resolution anytime a debt is issued. So that debt resolution number, it should kind of be one and done. You put it in and it's the same every year that you're reporting, just like it is on the long-term debt page of the budget. But for TIF, we just want you, for your TIF agreements, we just want you to put in something like TIF rebate or TIF agreement and have that be your debt resolution number, because there's going to be multitudes of them. Rate range, like I stated before, we want you to put in the high rate and the low rate over the life of your debt. So for TIF agreements, it'll likely be 0/0 because most TIF agreements don't have an interest rate. But for your structured debts, you're going to have a range that looks something like this, where you're going from like 1-2% up to 5%, or 1-2% up to 3%, depending on when the debt was issued and what the market was like. But we want to know, out of, let's say, the 20 years that this debt is going to exist, what is the lowest rate that you're going to pay and what is the highest rate that you're going to pay. This allows it to be tied to your audits. For those of you who are audited, you know that this column is a column in the supplemental detail of your audit when they list all of the debts of the city. So the auditor's office asked that we put that in there. Very simple. And again, that won't change unless the debt is refunded and the interest rate is changed. So that'll stay from year to year. The next column is one of the most important ones. And it's also kind of one of the more complex ones. If you're new to your city, you may not just know this stuff off the top of your head. You're probably going to have to go back to the resolution and look for it. So here we want to know, what was the method of approval? Was it voted or non-voted by your council or by your citizens? So we got a lot of options under here of what it could be. Voted means it's a general corporate purpose, general obligation debt, and it was above the threshold for voting. So it means that it had to go to a vote of the citizens. That's what voted means. Was this voted on by your citizens before the debt could be issued? Okay. Non-voted essential GO means that it was an essential corporate purpose under 384-24 of the Code of Iowa, and it did not need to go to a vote of the people. The council could approve it on their own power. Next down is it's a general corporate purpose, a general corporate purpose debt, meaning that it possibly could be voted on, but in this case, the amount was below the threshold. So there is a set of thresholds updated yearly, and here's the set of thresholds current. So on our website, dom.iowa.gov, under the city resources section of the local government page, there is at the top a link to this updated debt issuance vote threshold document. Every January 1, we have to update this document and post it back to our website. And what we do is we update the thresholds based on the last 12 months CPI, or CPIU in this case, and then we increase or decrease the thresholds for when a vote has to occur on general corporate purpose debt at these various levels of population. You can see cities is down here on the bottom. So your population is over here. That doesn't change. What will change is the threshold. So last year, 2024 calendar year, the thresholds were here. And then we applied the increase of 2.7% CPIU to get to the new thresholds over here. So if your debt principal amount being issued for a general corporate purpose debt. Now, remember, essential corporate purpose debt never goes to a vote unless it gets reverse referendum, so you don't have to worry about it for this purpose. Here, we're talking about general corporate purpose debt issuances. If you are a city of 5,000 to 75,000 and you are issuing a debt more, in a debt principal, so just principal balance, more than 934,570, it has to go to a vote of the people. Okay. If I issue a $900,000 debt or an $800,000 debt or a $500,000 debt, and I'm between 5,000 and 75,000 in population, I'm good. I don't have to take it to a vote of the people because I'm below the voting threshold. Okay. And that's always available on our website, dom.iowa.gov. Now that has that has ramifications only for the general corporate purpose GOs. So you can see right here, we have essential corporate purpose. Here we have essential corporate purpose. Those never get voted on. It's only the general corporate purpose where we have to vote. Okay. The other option is no vote because it's not a GO. Okay. So any debt that's not a GO does not go to a vote of the people, unless under some circumstances there can be a reverse referendum situation. But other than that, it doesn't go to a vote of the people. So you would select non-GO, no vote for items like an SRF debt right here, where it's a revenue debt, in this case, a water revenue debt, where we're going to be repaying strictly from the water revenues or the revenues of our water system. So we don't have to go to a vote of the people on that. That is a negotiated contract with the state revolving fund in the city that gets approved by the council and then paid back with non-property tax revenue. Okay. Same thing down here at the bottom where I put in a road use tax fund bond, where it is, again, not a property tax based GO, general obligation, so it doesn't go to a vote of the people. There you would select, in this case, I selected the wrong one. So you'd select no vote, non-GO. Okay. So you have to make sure that you select the correct category. And for you, those of you who are new to your city, this may require a little bit of research. That's why I want to get the word out now so that you can start tracking down how were these debts approved. Okay. This is the first time that we've ever had to collect this kind of information. So in this first year, this may be an onerous task to get it all set up based on, how many debts you have and how organized the prior clerk left the office. Those two things could make this an onerous task. It might not be if there's been good tracking. From here on out, I would strongly suggest that every time a debt is passed, that you have tracking on what was the debt, what was the purpose, why was or how was it voted in by the council or voted in by the people. Just make sure that that's being tracked as you go. The next column is familiar to anybody who's done a budget and had debt. Amount of issues. So this is the amount of principal that was issued at the time that the debt was taken out. Okay, so what was the original amount borrowed, essentially? For TIF rebates, this gets a little trickier because there's no original amount borrowed. So we're going to use the same tactic that we use for the annual urban renewal report, where we want you to say the amount, the not exceed amounts all added together would be your amount of issue. So if you have if you have 5 rebates and they each have a not to exceed number, which means an amount that's a max amount that the city will pay for the agreement, you would add all of those not to exceeds together and you'd put it here on amount of issue. Every other debt, the amount of issue will be stated clearly in the resolution that approved the debt or on the debt instrument itself, so the debt document itself. So we want that original amount of issue. Principal outstanding as of the beginning of the fiscal year is pretty clear. Like I said, the only place where it's a little unclear is when we have debts like this at the bottom where we issued it during fiscal year 25. So as of July 1, 2024, they're really for this debt, the amount is outstanding at July 1, 2024 was 0, but we need to recognize that an amount was issued so that we can get it to flow into other P10. So I would say this is the amount that I added during the year as well. So if I issued new debt during the year, I put it in this column. So we issued this one on June 1st. That's still during the fiscal year. So I put the amount of principal outstanding as of July 1 is the amount issued on July 1, on June 1, excuse me, so that we can get it into the correct column on your other P10 page. Right. Next 2 columns are pretty simple, and it's stuff that's been reported on the AFR in the past. It was just reported as part of other P10. So that's the amount of principal paid during the fiscal year. So this is the actual amount of principal paid during the fiscal year added up. In the case of TIF rebates, we just add it all together, the amount of payments that we cut to those rebates. Everything else, it should be straight from your payment schedule, or just check your general ledger and see what checks did we cut and how much did we actually pay to each debt in terms of principal and then in terms of interest. Okay, so how much was paid just during the fiscal year for principal and for interest. Tied to other debt gives you a list, and the list will build as you enter new debts. So each time you add a new debt, this list gets longer and longer. And so we want you to say which debts were tied together and basically worked towards the same purpose or on the same project. So for example, in the middle, I have two SRF debts, a water SRF from 2018 and a water SRF from 2020. They both were for water main replacement. So they were both doing the same project. So I would say that line number 3, the 2018 water SRF, is tied to line 4, the 2020 water SRF. And then likewise on the 2020 SRF line 4, I would say it's tied to line 3. So I just have to drop it down and select the correct line to show that these two debts went to the same project. Okay. If they're different projects, but a similar purpose, but they're different projects, then they're not tied together. So if I have a bunch that are like street replacement, but they're not replacing the same street, those are separate and not tied together, right? But if I have a water main replacement project where I had to take out two debts to finish this project, that is when we want you to show that these are tied together and they worked towards the same purpose. Okay. The last column over here to the right is projects funded, the projects funded by the debt, or the purposes funded by the debt. So why was this debt taken out? What was done with the money that was borrowed? That's what we want to know. Now, we only have 150 characters per each of these lines, okay? So in each of these boxes, I can get in 150 characters. That includes spaces and punctuation. Those each count as a character, right? That's because we have to still fit this onto a page. And let me bring up the report page. Hopefully you can see that. We still have to fit it onto a printed page, which really constricts what we can do in terms of character limit. We tried to push it as far as we can, and 150 is about as good as you can do without getting an unreasonably small amount of debts on a page. Right now, we can accommodate pretty safely 20 debts per page. So we have 6 separate pages of 20 debts each, okay? And you can do 150 characters in each of the projects funded by debt. But in this column, what we really need to know is what did you use the money for? And you can be as concise as possible. Now, it still has to be understandable. Don't just put in internal city project numbers, because that doesn't help anybody, right? This still has to be something that can be parsed by a normal human being and relatively understood as to what you did with the money. So I gave a couple of examples here of just items that you can enter. So for the TIF rebates line, just enter TIF rebates or TIF economic development agreements or TIF agreements, something like that, because that's pretty understood, right? We did rebates and economic development agreements, and that's what this is for. But when you get some of these other projects that are very specific, like down here, we have a 2023 City Hall renovations debt that we did that was voted on by the people. I would put in renovation of City Hall, and then I may follow it up with a little bit of specificity as far as I can, like council chamber, chambers, if I can type right, and entry hall, or whatever area was done, to the extent that I can do it. But if it's something simple like water main replacement, I would just put in water main replacement and then the location potentially, if it was not citywide, or if it wasn't, if it was in just one area, I could put water main replacement, Southeast 14th Street, or whatever we want to kind of help people understand where was this money spent. That's the purpose of this category, is why was this loan taken out and where was the money spent, okay? So a lot of these columns will be just used for that report that I talked about earlier to the General Assembly. The projects funded by debt, the amounts of issue, the amounts outstanding. Well, the amounts outstanding will actually flow through, but the amount of issue, the rate range, the resolution number, a lot of that stuff will just be in the report. But some of these columns, like type of debt, the date of issuance, the amount outstanding, the paid per year from principal and interest, and the purpose, those are used to place the debt and aggregate the debt onto other P10. So I have to make sure I select each of these correctly, because then this tells, so debt type of debt tells which column on other P10 to put the totals. Date of issuance tells me, do I need to include this as issued during the year and put it under the issued column? The amount principal outstanding goes into the outstanding column on the on the very first column on other P10. The fiscal year principal paid goes under the retired column, and then the fiscal year interest goes under the interest column. Purpose of debt, and you can see there's quite a few purposes that you can select, but they align with other P10's categories, the rows of other P10. So I just have to select the line that I would normally have put this on other P10 in prior years. Okay. So this is kind of what was the purpose of the debt. And so I select the correct one to tell it which line to go on to another P10. And then all of this information gets aggregated and flows through into the other P10 debt matrix. Okay. So if I have issuances during the year, it's important that I put in the correct date for the issuance and I put in an amount under that amount outstanding as of July 1, 2024, so that it gets into the issued column. Okay. And you got to make sure that you get the right amount of principal paid in the principal paid column so that that properly flows through to the retired column. Ultimately, you should be able to tie out this other P10 debt matrix with your debt detail report minus anything marked as TIF agreement, because the TIF agreement does not flow through to the matrix. It just stays here for reporting purposes to the general assembly. Okay. All right. Let's see. I think we've got some chat items. So let's see what kind of questions we have at this point.
I was just going to say, maybe time to pause
Yes.
because they're
Yep.
backing up here.
Yep.
I'm trying to get back to where we began with the questions, folks. There's been a dozen or
Okay. So this
so.
first one I can see is, does this include interfund loans? No. Only debt owed outside the city. So good question. And I forgot to bring that up, but no, this will not include interfund loans. Only debt payments leaving the city. Okay. Slides will be available after the webinar, and I'm going to be beefing them up a little bit from what I have here. Since I was doing the demonstration live, I didn't put in any screenshots. I will add screenshots to the slides before I give them to Mickey to disperse. Will the purpose of debt be a drop down, which we must choose one or open enter? Nope, it is. So the purpose of debt is a drop down. We give you the search function above because if I wanted to say GO, I could type it in and then it will bring it up and I can click it. Okay. So there is a purpose of debt drop down, and that type function is just to help you search the list because it's a longer list. Let's see. How specific do we need to be on purpose? Can we put sewer CIPP lining, or do we have to put sewer CIPP lining, comma, Almira and Diamond Street? So the example with the streets is better if you've got the space, but if we're running into a space issue, the sewer CIPP lining is good. That's descriptive. That tells people what was happening enough that they can then do a little more research if they're interested, or ask more questions of the city if they're interested. If you can add in those little details like the location, but if you're running into character limit problems, you can leave out the location and just state what the project was. When we have multiple purposes, how will the debt detail page know which purpose it goes on for water line and other lines? How could it autofill? So this is a good question, because you may have a GO debt that was issued for multiple purposes. It was issued for partially for water, partially for streets, partially for some other function of the city. In those cases, there's a couple of different ways that we can go about this. It's not going to be a perfect fix. But if I have one where it has two very strong purposes, so let's say I issued a GO debt that did both water function and it did streets function, there's a couple of different ways that I can go. Number one is I would say you can put that in on one line and select the purpose to be GO, general obligation, and we won't go any further than that. The other thing you could do is you could enter it as two separate lines, half in each, with the same resolution number, one for water, one for streets. But I would say if it's a GO, just enter it as GO and put it all on one line, and then that's where it will fit in. If you had like a water sewer revenue together, then you could do a split out and say, this is the water portion, this is the sewer portion. But GOs are usually the things where you have multiple items together. And so I would just put it all on one line and mark it as GO. Let's see. For TIF rebates, we have a cap on rebates, but only if they create enough valuation. Will we have to reconcile the difference at some time? So we're going to caveat the heck out of the report to the General Assembly to say this is a figure that to essentially in wording it better than how I'm wording it right now, but to basically say this is a not to exceed that isn't probably going to be met. There will be a lower amount paid out in most of these circumstances than the not to exceed. So we will have some language in there so that you won't have to really do any kind of reconciliation at any point. As you draw those down, we'll just have the um, the language in there to say that the amount of issue is going to be higher than what is actually paid, and that's how we're going to have to deal with that. Because like I said, it's not a perfect fit on any of these. If you choose other for type of debt, will we need to give an explanation somewhere? So if you choose other for type of debt, you'll put in the purpose there that will kind of explain it. You don't need to do any further explanation than state what the project is. We've never required that on the AFR before. We won't require it now. There shouldn't be too many of them where you choose other. There will only be a few where the type of debt will be other. So that shouldn't come up too often. If you have a specific other question as you're entering this, I'll kind of take those case by case. Just talk to me because there shouldn't be many, if any, where you're entering other. Are annual appropriation debts issues handled differently? So annual appropriation debt issuances, the amount of issue will be higher than the amount outstanding for the year. So this is how you would handle these is when you issue an annual appropriation debt, which for those of you who don't know, an annual appropriation debt is you issue, say, a $10 million bond for 10 years, but then the council only approves each year individually. So at any one time, if I have a $10 million bond out for 10 years, I will only count 1 million of that against my debt capacity because that's all I've approved at this point. I have to reapprove it every single year. So what we'll do there is you'll show the amount of issue will be the full amount that was originally approved as part of that agreement, but the amount outstanding will only be the amount that has been approved to this point. So if I'm reapproving that every single year, my $10 million bond, I'm reapproving it $1 million a year, then my amount outstanding every single year, my principal outstanding July 1, 2024 will be $1 million. But my amount of issuance will be $10 million, if that makes sense, because that's the full amount, but I'm only approving it a year at a time. And that amount outstanding is the amount that counts against your general obligation debt limit. So put in $1 million for the amount outstanding, and that's how we'll handle the annual appropriation debts. Okay. If the rate range does not change for the life of the debt, can we put the 1%, or do we need yeah, it will capture. So like here on line 3, I put in something like an SRF. You're going to have very little or no rate change across the life of the loan. So here's a way to do that. So if my loan or my bond is going to be 3% every single year, my bank loan is going to be 3% every single year, then I put in 3.00-3.00 to show that my low is 3, my high is 3. And that's how you do it, because it's going to ask for a range. So that's how you would handle the rate range. Let's see. For FY26, I will have a non-voted GO urban renewal bond issued. The bonds will not be below the threshold. How will I report that in the voted column? So your urban renewal non-voted that'll be essential corporate purpose is how you would report that. Non-voted essential corporate purpose is how you would vote that, how you would show that. How do I report debt that has been refinanced and one debt issue is voted and the other was not voted and are combined? So that should be 2 separate debts if you've got, well, it depends on, so if you've got it combined where you're refinancing an old one and you're bringing in a new one and you had to vote on part of it, mark it as voted, okay? Because we go with the more restrictive. That's probably how we're going to have to handle that. So if part of it in the past was not voted on and it's a refi and it didn't have to be voted on because it's a refinance, which is an essential corporate purpose of a city. But the other part of the debt was a general corporate purpose that was subject to vote, then you put in voted, because we'll go with the most restrictive. What if we have a bond that is both essential corporate purpose and general corporate purpose, but it was merged together? Stop doing that is what I would say. No, just like I said, go with the more restrictive. If you had to vote on part of it, use that. Use voted. How do we list ones by reverse referendum? So if it was a bond that was taken, it was a general or an essential corporate purpose that got reverse referendumed, you would then count it as voted because it was voted on. So that would get counted as voted if it was taken to a reverse referendum. How would you list a GO bond that is paid for by revenue? So that is still a GO bond. You treat it as a GO bond regardless of the source of repayment. So it still gets counted as a GO. You're just abating it with revenue from another source. What if you have an issuance that has non-voted GO and no vote essential corporate purpose? You would just show it as non-voted GO. Is probably how you would handle that, because that's the more restrictive of the two. Do you see this replacing the outstanding obligations disclosure report filed with the state treasurer? Maybe, but not yet. They still exist. They still coexist. And we're working on this to try to bring these two together. But they're both obligated by statute. Currently, you're obligated to do both, even though now they severely overlap, and I recognize that. And ours is actually a more restrictive report. So it could really replace the treasurer's outstanding obligations report. But as of right now, you have to do them both. But we'll look at that into the future. But now they're both statutorily required, so we have to stick with them. Where do the bond fees go? Bond fees do not get reported in this report. We're only talking about principal and interest, so you leave those out of this report. We have a loan that is 0% interest, but there are administration fees that we have to pay each year. Do we include these? No, we do not include any administration fees, only principal, only legitimate principal and interest. What if a city has more than two debts related to a single project? Then you just show them as tied together using that tied to other debt column right here. So that's a way to show these two debts were issued separately, but they're going towards the same purpose. They are tied together. You would select each other's line. So if I entered one as line 3 and one as line 4, on line 3, I show it connected to line 4. On line 4, I show it connected to line 3. I know if you're just listening, that makes absolutely no sense, but when you get in here, it will make a lot more sense. What about when there are multiple projects tied to multiple other bonds? We can only tie 2 together. For example, City Hall, we borrowed 3 times for the project. So on here, we do have a limitation where you can only tie 2 together, but what you can do, so let's say we've got 3. So let's say that the City Hall renovations, the water SRF and the sewer SRF, I know it doesn't make any sense, but let's say that they all were tied together. What I can do is I could tie the first one to the third one, tie the third one to the, or tie the third one to the fourth one, tie the fourth one to the fifth one, and then tie the fifth one back to the third one. And that way we can show a link that shows that lines 3, 4, and 5 all work together. And then I can also put in if I have room, I can also put in my purpose tied to, and then the debt name, okay? Or debt names, if you have room in your purpose. Otherwise, you would link one to the next, back to the front, okay? So that you tie one to each of the other ones, and that way we can see, oh, these are all grouped together, okay? Good question. And yeah, I thought about that, but it was getting way too complicated to have you just type in the lines. And then we have so much wild variance in how people type it in. We thought it better to go with a drop down and just try to work these out one by one. Where do we put service fees? You don't. We already handled that one. How will cities that issue one bond a year to fund their entire CIP report each issuance? One bond could be GPC or EPC or include a voted portion. So again, you go with the lowest or the most restrictive for if it's voted, non-voted, or whatever. And then you would show all of the projects. that you type in all of the different projects that are being funded by that bond up to the 150 character limit. So if that becomes too big, so let's say that our 15 different projects that we're funding out of our CIP becomes too big, you can break it into pieces and just show it as, so let's say I had the water SRF, but or let's pick a geo. So I had this geo swimming pool improvements bond, but it needed to be like, it had a bunch of different stuff that we did. So I could do, you know, one or part one over here, and then drop down a line and do part two, and then just break them apart and show a part of that original amount of issue and a part of that debt payment and a part of that amount outstanding on 3 separate lines. I'd like to avoid that as much as possible, but we're going to have some of those instances where you have so many projects funded by a geodebt that you're not able to fit them all into the projects funded by debt or purpose. So then you could break those apart. And if you have one of those that you need assistance with, obviously come to me and we'll figure it out how to put it in best, how we can make it best fit. That's what we're going to have to do. This is year one. You guys have so many, I understand this. I have zero ego or hubris tied up in this. I know this is probably not how it's going to be in future years. This is our first crack at it. You guys have so many different permutations of debt that I've never even thought about or even seen, that we're going to have to make some changes. So bring those one-offs to me if you can't fit them in, and we'll figure out a way to enter them, even if we have to break them apart. Let's see. I should clarify that I know I don't need to report on the AFR for FY25, just thinking ahead. Oh, yeah. Okay. I see a problem finding resolutions from 30 years ago and also the voting information. One of my cities had a fire and we lost a lot of documents. How should this be documented? That is not great because you're required to hold on to those forever. But in the event of a loss, I would say go back and talk to the bond firm who assisted you. If you had a bond attorney who assisted you with that debt, talk to them. If it's geo debt, you can talk to the county auditor because they should have a copy as well, because that gets filed with them every single year. So there's a couple of different places that you can put that, barring that. So if you absolutely can't find through any other source a copy of the debt resolution, then you should enter the information as you best understand it on here. Okay. So you have to enter a lot of the same information on the long-term debt page of the budget. You should make sure that they match and that you are doing it to the best of your knowledge or ability. Obviously, as you have those one-offs, weird ones, bring them to me and we'll figure them out on a case-by-case basis, but that's kind of the general direction you can go down. Can you discuss the purpose of debt dropdown? Yes. Okay. So the purpose of debt dropdown, like I said earlier, just basically tells us which line of the other P10 page, the other P10, that this should drop into. The idea behind this debt matrix and the idea behind the purpose was to tell us originally it was to tell us what was this money used for? What was the purpose of the debt? What did we expend cash on? Okay, so you would pick the line that it goes on to based on what did I do with the money? That still pretty much holds. You pick it by what did I use the money for? The only difference being if I did a bunch of different things under a geo, I put it all on the geo line. Okay, but otherwise I look at we borrowed this money. How did I use this money? I go onto the debt detail page and I select my purpose of debt based on what did we do with the money? Okay, and for TIF agreements, TIF revenue is what you would select. Just FYI, I don't think I made that clear earlier, so I'm making that clear now. But that's kind of what did I spend the money on? These two columns are next to each other because they're very similar in purpose. This is the general purpose. This is the little bit more fleshed out purpose. So what did you do with the money? That tells you what to select under purpose of debt. We have a geo bond that is paid partially with TIF revenue abatement. Do I put anything in TIF or report all of it on the geo bond line? I would say report all of it on the geo bond line, because we have to kind of make these two work together. So you would put that all on the geo bond line. We have a geo with water, sewer, and street purposes. I've been separating out the amounts each year for accurate reporting. How will this happen now? You can do it on multiple lines as parts of the debt. Seems like this captures everything on the debt obligations report. Yes, it does. We'll work on that. Does this include leases? If yes, this would include multiple year leases that that were approved as a debt instrument. So you can have leases that are shorter term in nature um, and are more contractual. But if it's one that got approved by a resolution and as a debt instrument, yes, it should be listed on here. What would other be? Yeah, other is basically a catch-all category for things that don't fit neatly into one of the other categories. There is no specific thing that would be other. It would be just if it doesn't fit into any of the other puzzle spots, you put it there. So other should very rarely be used. There's not many that would be other. How to report sewer debt that was borrowed as a GO. You could report that for purpose. So the debt type would be GO. You could report that for purpose either as GO or sewer if it's just one thing, right? So if I issued a GO and it was only for sewer purposes, I could report that on my type purpose as sewer utility. That would be fine as long as I've marked it as a GO for type of debt. I have no problem with that. But it's the ones where the GO is split into 80 different directions or 3 different directions. That's when I would want you to report it as general obligation purpose because it's got so many different pieces. Let's see. Would the rate range be included in the original resolution? No. Well, it would be in the resolution, but it wouldn't state here's your rate range. You'd have to go and look at your amortization table on your original resolution or your original official statement if it's a bond or your loan agreement, and it will give you each year what is the interest rate, and then you just pick out the highest and the lowest. If part of the GO was essential and part was non-essential, should we split those onto 2 different lines, but then tied together? You could do that. Yes, absolutely. That would be a good way to go about it is separate your non-voted from your voted or your essential corporate purpose from your general corporate purpose, put them on 2 lines, name them similar, and then tie them together. That would be fine. You could absolutely do that if you wanted to, or you could put it all in one line and mark it with the most restrictive. I'm fine either way. Do we use resolution authorizing and approving loan agreement, providing for issuance? So you would use the one that approves the actual sale of the debt, because I would say issuance, but every city names their GOs a little differently. The one you want is the one that is approved the night of the sale of the debt. That's how I'm going to phrase this, because titling varies, right? But you approve the sale of the debt with a resolution. That's the one we need, because that actually approves the debt. We don't want the ones that approve future issuance of a debt or hearings to take on a debt. We want the one that approves the debt itself, however you name that. Couldn't we get the TIF information from the annual urban renewal report that we have to do? Yes, these two should pretty much tie together pretty closely. For the amount paid, the amount outstanding, and the interest paid. The annual urban renewal report and the TIF rebates section of this report, those two should tie together very closely. So that you can check one against the other. If we do essential and general corporate purpose and combine these, yep, we already did that. Does leasing, we've got that. What defines a short-term debt? So a short-term debt is a debt that is basically going to have no repayment because it's going to be refinanced immediately by a larger debt. So we're talking about debts that are less than 2 years in length and are not going to receive a principal payment. That's a short-term debt. Okay. So we're talking, usually it's a 1 year. We're talking about planning and design loans through the SRF fund, where they give you money to do the engineering up front, and then they bring in the big SRF after the fact that pays that off, and it becomes part of that bigger debt. USDA does it similar. They have a construction loan that you often have to take out through your local bank, and then the USDA comes in and pays off the balance of that with the bigger debt that you take on with them later on. That would be what is basically, those are the types of short-term debts that cities get into. Could be some other instances where you run into a short-term debt. If you have a question about it, just let me know, because those are the main two. But there are instances where there could be others. If we have to refinance a bond, can we enter the refinance in projects funded by the debt? Yes, you could enter refinancing of prior debt as a as the purpose. You could. If you're going to do that, what I would say is enter refinancing and then enter the name of the prior debt or the stated name on the resolution, or enter the stated name in the resolution that it's paying off so that people can track the trail. That's all we need to do. If you have a debt that was refinanced and the interest rate went down, do you start with the highest rate first and then the new lower rate? So if you refinanced, you've essentially created a new debt. So the old debt that you refinanced no longer matters. We want to focus on the new debt, and you'd put in the amount of high and low interest for that refinance debt. If a city has a financial advisor for their bonds, the FA would be a good resource for a new clerk. Correct. Good point, Cindy. Thank you. If you're new to a city, check in with your FA for a good listing of your debt. They probably have a copy of the resolutions or at least the debt instrument. Your bond attorney, they had a pre-existing relationship with a bond attorney. Get to know them and see what they have on file for all of the debts that have been issued and the resolutions that were drafted. And then if neither of those work, county auditor is your best source for GO debts only, because those are the only types of debts that the county auditor has to worry about. You can go to the county auditor for help with your getting resolutions that you might have misplaced. If we don't show our loan service fees from the SRF, won't our AFR not balance since we did pay these fees out? Are we still able to enter those on the long-term debt page? Yes, that's where these two differ. Long-term debt page, we have a spot for your servicing fees. Here, the legislation doesn't ask for them. It just asks for principal and interest. So we're going to leave them out of here. Now, it will still, it's not like this page balances to what you enter on pages 2 through 9 of your AFR. We're not balancing them against each other to find, you didn't report this $500 fee. Report your pages 2 through 9 of the AFR actuals as you actually spent them. This is a different object. We're not trying to tie these two together necessarily. We're trying to report on debt specifically here. It's just the AFR is the instrument that they use to get there. If we have 3 GO annually appropriated bonds that TIF pays, so should the purpose be TIF revenue, or that's how I usually report it? Yes, that would be fine. So if you have 3 GO general appropriations and they're all TIF, and that's the only thing that they were used for, use TIF revenue. Absolutely. Like I said, we're now serving 2 masters, right? We've got our other P10 that serves 1 master. We've got our city debt detail page that's going to be serving a different master, and they want different things. So I'm trying to jam these two together as best I can and make it as easy as possible for you, rather than having you enter information on 2 separate pages. It's going to require some hinking along as we go. So we'll figure that out. But for now, if you've got a GO and you issued that GO for one purpose, and it's one of the purposes of debt stated here, like I issued it all for my sewer utility and it's going to be repaid with sewer utility revenue, then mark the purpose of debt as sewer utility. That's fine. But if I issued one where I've got a bunch of different purposes, I've got all kinds of different, then I would just put it as general obligation GO. Best we can do. Okay. Or split it onto separate lines. But I would try to avoid that if I can, because it's just extra work. And let's see, on P1, the debt will pull from, will the debt pull from this new page or page 10? So that'll flow through from page 10 as it always has. And that's why we're kind of jamming this into page 10 to allow it to flow through. So the at the bottom of page, all funds page 1, right down here, we've got this debt section here. Okay. So down here, it gives the amount of debt, the amount of the debt obligation limit, so the GO, general obligation limit, that gets recalculated every year. And then we list the principal outstanding, essentially, for each debt as of the end of the fiscal year. That's all calculated same as it always has on other P10 in this debt matrix. And then it's reported through to the front. So the totals under general obligation, TIF revenue, other, still flow through all the way to the bottom of this page in the same spots. Oh, and short-term debt all flows through to the same spot. So nothing about that has changed. But that also means it's super important for you to get it in the right spot, or select the right item for purpose of debt and type of debt. okay? So that it gets onto the right line of other P10, and that way it can flow to the right line or the right space on the all funds P1. Will this information populate next year so that we only have to enter it principal and interest paid? No, but we're working on something. If I can get some money together, which is always a giant if when you're working with appropriations, I'm trying to get some money together to create a debt database where we would have you guys enter all of your debt information and your payment schedules into one spot, and it would flow out to a bunch of different reports, and then you wouldn't have to update it unless something changed. That's been on the board for a few years now. I'm trying to get that running. We'll see if I can get some money to do that. But that's ultimately the goal, is with all of these debt items, we want you to have to enter them once, and then they'll flow through into the appropriate reports. But I got to get the money to do that. Do you see this being permanent, or will this be more of a trial basis with House File 718? This is currently permanent, unless they make a law change to make it not permanent. So prepare this to prepare for this to be the way forever. Now, like I said, the page, the entry page, the city debt detail page, we may change that over time to as we get more information on what kind of debts you guys have, what shape they're in. That will massage. But you're going to have to do this page forever as of right now, okay? Unless a law change comes in and they no longer require it. And snuck one in, just confirming, I have to list a short-term SRF design loan, even though it will be moved into a long-term debt. Yes, you have to. You've always had to list your planning and design loans right down here under short-term debt. So how much planning and design loan was outstanding at the beginning of the year? How much is outstanding at the end of the year? That's a short-term debt. You do not have to put it on the debt detail page, okay? This is only for long-term debts. If it's short-term, if it's an SRF planning and design loan, a USDA construction loan, those go on other P10 under the short-term debt space. Okay.
Hey, Ted, we also have about a dozen in the Q&A
Okay.
area.
Let
Do
me
you want
pop
to get
that
to
up.
those now, or do you want
Yep.
to? Okay.
Let me pop those up quick if I can. Do you have them, Mickey? I don't know that I have
I
the Q&A.
I do. They show up for me. Sorry if they don't show
Oh,
up for
there we go.
you.
I got it. Nope,
You
it was
got it?
just
Okay.
under a different panel. Yep.
All
Okay.
right.
So GO annual appropriated would be, so GO annually appropriated debt. Would that be a no vote essential GO? It depends. Usually annually appropriated debt is a non-voted essential GO, but that's not necessarily 100% across the board going to be the case. But usually, if you're doing a GO annually appropriated, it would be an essential, but not necessarily. So you can't say that all the time. We do one bond issue a year, several purposes. We covered that. Do we, so answered live. Okay. Do we report the full debt amount for annual appropriation bonds, or do, so again, for just as a reminder, for annually appropriated bonds on the city debt detail page, you would put in the full amount of issue. So the full amount that was issued at the beginning, that would get entered there. But then the principal outstanding each year would only be the amount appropriated for the fiscal year. That's it. Okay. So then you wouldn't have to enter the full, so if I did 10 million and I've still got 2.5, but I've only appropriated 1 million, this would say 1 million if it was an annual appropriated instead of 2.5. Okay. Because the other 1.5 hasn't been appropriated yet. So that's how you would work a annual appropriation. If we have TIF rebates and also a TIF loan, are they listed together on the detail page, or do they need to be two entries? Two entries. The only things that get aggregated are your agreements. So your TIF rebates, economic development agreement, developer agreements, and forgivable loan agreements. Those all get added together and aggregated because they are what we would call the other obligations debt. A TIF loan is a loan and it's a structured debt. So it would go on its own line. Good question. Way to tease those out. Let's see. If you have three different kinds of TIFs, do they all go together on one line? If TIF has, okay, so that's the same kind of question. Just answered that. The two water revenue lines was a little confusing on whether they should be tied together or not. Same purpose, but different years, different projects, tied, yes or no. So if they're different projects, because this all goes back to, am I issuing these two debts for the same purpose? If I'm not, if they're not going to the same project, you don't tie them together, right? It has to be the same project. If I'm issuing these two debts, they're both doing water main projects, but they're doing them in completely different parts of the city. that's not the same project, right? Especially if they were in different years. It's the continuation of a plan, but it's not the same project, so you don't have to tie them together. Good question. Would lost revenue bond be an other type of debt, or would it be revenue? It would be a revenue, in my opinion. You could argue that that could be other. It is, what do they call that? They call that a special obligation debt, because it's not a general obligation of the city, but it is based on tax revenue that comes into the city, though it's not property tax. So I use it as revenue. I would call that a revenue debt. It ties more closely to revenue. Regarding annually appropriated debt, as of July 1, you just made the $1 million payment in June, and the council would not have yet voted to pay the next million. Wouldn't the principal outstanding be zero? So it would not be. This is annually appropriated debt. So if I have an annually appropriated debt where it's $1 million a year, right? Then it gets appropriated. Let's say they appropriate it in September for whatever reason. That September appropriation 2024, September 1, 2024, that's my amount outstanding. And then it gets paid in June, right? So that's kind of how we would work that. Is it gets annually whenever, if the annual appropriation that happens during the fiscal year is the one that you put in for the amount outstanding. Okay. I know somewhere along the lines, someone is going to have an annual appropriation schedule that's going to cause a problem. Bring that to me individually and we'll figure it out. But for the most part, you'll be able to say, was this annually appropriated during the fiscal year being reported? If yes, that's the amount you put in. Okay, for under the principal outstanding. How would I show geo corporate purpose bonds that is paid from debt service and from TIF? You would put that in as a geo, just geo, because that's going to be probably more. It's going to be more of a headache to split it out onto two lines than it's worth. Put it all in as geo. Will this info be auto-populated next year? Not yet. Nope. Hopefully in the future. Planning and design loan, not reported. Yep. Planning and design loan, again, just to reiterate, not reported on city debt detail, only reported in short-term debt on other P10. And then how about an interfund loan? Interfund loans do not get reported anywhere on the other P10 or on the city debt detail. Okay. That's money you owe yourself, not money you owe to someone else. You also do not report those on your long-term debt page of your budget. Just FYI. So make sure that you're not doing that. And I think, Mickey, unless I'm wrong, that clears all of them, right?
That clears all of them. That was an
Okay.
amazing rapid fire round of questions. You
Well,
are an incredible speaker, Ted.
we probably got somebody lost in there. So if you have follow-up questions, let me pop back. I know most of you already know all the information that I'm about to give. Let me pop it back up. But I have my contact info here at the back of the presentation. So let me zip. There's my contact info, name, email, phone number. So if you have questions as you go, and you will, if you could email me your questions, that would be great so that I can share them at large in an FAQ document that I'll be working on. And I will add FAQs to the instructions, the AFR instructions as we go, as I get questions that are pertinent and that I think will help everyone. And remember that this information too, and a statement on what needs to go under each of the columns is in the AFR instructions. So when the AFR gets released, there's an instruction button in the top left of the system. You can click on that instructions button to get a PDF copy of the instructions. And then we will have information in there about how do I figure out what goes where. Now, some of these questions about, do I need to split these out? How do I report these? That obviously I can't cover in there yet. I'll add that to the FAQ at the end of the document as we go. Okay, any other questions?
There's one that did drop in there just on when will the AFR be available to begin?
The AFR will, and that's a great question. It should be available. I know I said last week, and then we found a hiccup and something wasn't working right. Because the last thing I want to do is release a new thing that doesn't work right. That's terrible for all of us. But I should be able to release this on Monday. That's what I'm shooting for. I had a couple of quick changes made yesterday that I haven't tested yet, so I don't want to say tomorrow. But Monday is the date that I'm shooting for to get this out and ready to go.
Okay.
Any other questions, quick?
Yeah, somebody else raised their hand, and I missed that. Sorry, whoever that was. Maybe you dropped it into the Q&A. And actually, Robin, I just saw your hand raise as well. Let's see if I can find. Now I lost it again. Sorry, I'm not quick enough for you folks. Um, if you could drop that into the Q&A or the chat, that would be wonderful. Otherwise, we are at the hour or a little bit past.
Okay, one that just dropped in is
Oh
when will
yeah,
the urban renewal report be available? That's a great question. Uh, I don't know because that one I'm in charge of collecting it. I'm not in charge of the system. The system is actually run by the Legislative Services Agency. So they're the ones who make all the updates and maintain all the data. We just do all of the front end work for it, Carrie and I. Usually that's available towards the end of August. So that would be my guess. I know they're working on it because I've had the usual request for data to fill it. So they're working on it. And I would say end of August is what I would put on my calendar. Remember, the GASB 77 items are available now, and so you can be working on that. AFR should be Monday, hopefully, or early next week at the latest, and then the urban renewal report won't be until the end of August. And then you should already have access to your street finance report. I believe Mary Beth has that open and ready to go, and your outstanding obligations report I know is open because I've gotten some questions from people about that. So you have plenty of other stuff to work on in the meantime until the urban renewal report comes out. And also remember, this is due December 1st. And I'm glad you asked that question because that put this back into my head. As I stated earlier in the presentation, we now have a January 1 hard deadline for a report that we have to give to the legislature. So I got my last AFR submitted to me. Wait, still hasn't been submitted to me for FY24. I'm still sitting and waiting on one city to submit theirs. So that's a problem for me because now I have to report debt by January 1, but it's also a problem for the city because the city got their budget cut and I won't approve. I'm taking away all their public money from the state until they turn it in. So we don't want to get into that situation. But now more than ever, it's super important that you hit that December 1 deadline and don't let it slog over into the new year. Okay. Just please, for my sanity, I'm begging.
and just to basically put a bow on that last point there, Ginger just asked a question: Are there fines for being late with the AFR, which you just alluded to?
Yeah, eventually it will turn into a reduction of your budgeted property taxes for the next fiscal year if you let it go for long enough. So yes, there are repercussions. They are delayed repercussions, but they can come if you don't get on top of the AFR and the urban renewal report as well. They work in tandem.
Right, right.
Also, the one other thing I'll say, Mickey, before we close this out is um, there's two beginner sessions that are also happening. If you're not a beginner, you don't need to go to those because it's going to be this same information plus a bunch of beginner level stuff. So don't feel like you have to hit all three of these. I had a couple of people ask, so I figured I'd just state that clearly.
Yeah. Thanks for clarifying.
Mm-hmm.
Now I want to thank all the attendees for joining us today. We had quite a large group, as expected, but it's great information. And more than anything, I want to thank you, Ted, for sharing your time and wisdom. As always, I think all of us are probably in amazement on how much you can quickly pull all the dozens of questions we received. It was a great session. So again, we appreciate your time and wisdom. As always, just a great resource for all of our city officials across the state. That we do have those two sessions coming up here over the next week or 10 days, as Ted mentioned, for the beginners. And I'm sure those will be valuable as well. And as you all know, stay in touch with Ted throughout the reporting season, if you will. Lots to do, but it's always very, very important work. So thank you all again. We appreciate it. Enjoy your weekend. Enjoy the state fair.